Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another episode of Letter of Law Interviews. My name is Sarthak Bharadwaj. I'm going to be your host for the day. And today we are in conversation with Mr. Agnidipto Tarafder. He is an assistant professor at NUJS Kolkata and presently an LL.M candidate at Harvard University. And he's joining us from Boston. Is it Boston or Massachusetts?
Cambridge, actually. It's
Okay.
the city right next to. Yeah.
Wonderful. So that's where he's joining us from. A quick introduction about Agnida. He graduated from NUJS Kolkata, obtained his first LL.M from the same university, and he's been teaching at NUJS ever since. And now he's here at Harvard for an LL.M. Agnida, thank you so much for taking time out and being here with me today.
It's my pleasure, Sarthak. I'm very glad to be part of this podcast. I've seen some of your earlier episodes and learned a lot from hearing people coming in from different perspectives. And I'm very glad you're doing this, actually, because as I was mentioning to you earlier, one of the good things about these kind of episodes or these kind of interviews is that irrespective of what you learn about me, you probably might just figure out get some information about something you didn't know about earlier. I'm talking about the viewers, and that I think can be beneficial because I had read up on a lot of interviews before my applications, etc., and I learned a lot from that. So if anybody can gain any benefit from this process, I'm very glad to be able to do my bit.
Great. Thank you so much. So to the viewers, in today's conversation, we'll be talking about Agnida's journey as an academic, his Harvard application process, and also his research work on the marital rape issue. Timestamps for all of these aspects will be mentioned in the description, as well as the link to any papers or articles that we discuss will also be in the description box. So viewers, be sure to check that out and stick it out till the end. With that, Agnida, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit for the benefit of our listeners, your likes, dislikes, decision to pursue law, and anything else that you'd like to share with us?
This has always been a very difficult question to answer. But I mean, a basic description of what I do, you've already given. I teach at law school. How I landed up here was that I was born and raised in Calcutta, and I did my schooling from there. And it's at the end of, I think, about my +2 when I found out about law as a discipline, because there's a lot more awareness about CLAT and such things now than it was back when I was in school. And in fact, I was part of the first batch of CLAT aspirants who took the test in 2008. I was very fortunate to get through to NUJS, which happened to be in my city and was also my top preference. So that's something that kind of defined the rest of what I did, because I ended up staying on at NUJS in various capacities since 2008, first as a student, then as an LL.M, then as a research assistant, guest lecturer, and now finally as a member of faculty. And as far as my likes and dislikes are concerned, they're far too varied and I don't think very relevant. But yeah, I mean, I'm somebody who's done a lot of things accidentally, and have chanced upon a lot of things accidentally, which I think we will, in the course of our conversation, cover in some bits, at least the relevant bits. And so, yeah, I'm very happy to be part of this discussion.
Great. Thank you, sir. Agnida. So, we were talking a few days ago, preparing for the conversation, and you mentioned how you were still up at 3 a.m. at that point in time, burning the midnight oil, finishing your readings. So how has the transition for you been from a teacher to a student back again and staying up all nights, finishing up on assignments and readings?
It's been great, actually. I've very much enjoyed the process. I cannot lie. I've not enjoyed studying as much as I am doing now. The process of studying and the process of preparing for class has always been exciting for me. I mean, even when I teach, I make sure that I read up and things of that sort. But when the roles are reversed, some things change. So, for instance, the responsibility of managing to do things, managing to deliver a certain idea in class focuses you on, let's say, a certain category of readings. And here, that simply the breadth of what I'm learning. Because today, for instance, I'll just give you an example too. So yesterday I was studying cybersecurity. today in the morning, I read up on, like last night, in fact, I was reading up on Adam Smith and Marx for a law and
Wow.
political economy class.
Wow.
And over the course of the next couple of days, I'll be reading up on AI and property. So just the variation of things that you need to learn, and a large part of stuff that you haven't been exposed to in the past, is quite exhilarating for me. So yes, I'm having to burn the midnight oil, but I'd rather do this than grade papers any day. And I think that is a sentiment you will find echoed across academia. So most of my colleagues end up burning the midnight oil anyway, but perhaps probably doing things that are less exciting than this. So I'm taking this 1 year as a great break from the usual humdrum work back home.
Right.
Quite
That's very
exciting.
exciting. That's very exciting. But being a law teacher, being an assistant professor to now a student, have you found hacks as a student that you can use to get around the process? Because you've been in the shoes of the people who are teaching you right now, and you sort of know what they expect.
Uh, I wouldn't say that honestly. I mean, I'm not trying to be a prude here, but the reason I wouldn't say that is because the mode of evaluation is very different. So the mode of studying and evaluation that I have experienced here is so different from the one that we're used to back home.
Right.
Is that therefore the focus isn't so much about on learning the law as much as it is about let's say how you understand a paper, how you understand an argument, how you understand the position. So just to exemplify, most courses that at least I have ended up taking because of my interests are those that don't have an NSEM examination. So there is the mode of evaluation is class participation and turning in response papers, which is again a somewhat alien concept in India. And the expectation before you turn up for class is that you read the entire list of readings that have been made available to you and discern from that what you can about what your understanding is on the subject and mix it up with what's written, what's published, etc., and then produce a point of view, which is a very, very different thing from what we learn and teach in India. So I found that very interesting. But yeah, I mean, there's no hack as such, but yes, definitely. I mean, with the benefit of having taught, I can probably predict a little better than before as to what a teacher may be looking for. But then again, there's so much variance in even within the way in which things are taught here that I don't think finding a one hack solution to all problems is even possible, because there are like some 600 papers on offer and completely different professors,
Wow.
completely different. But yeah, I mean, it definitely gives you a perspective. It tells you where the teacher wants the conversation to head. So you kind of get I won't say it's an edge, but it's definitely a different perspective. Definitely, if I'd come here right after school, right after law school, I would have been a very different person, and I suspect would be able to take back a little less than what I will now.
Right.
Yeah.
So Agnida, I was listening to another one of your interviews, and you mentioned that you've been at NUJS for almost all of your adult life, first as an undergrad student, then as an LL.M, and later as a teacher. So
Yeah.
why don't you talk to us a little bit about that, your experience at NUJS and what that institution means to you?
See, I mean, NUJS is like a second home to me, so there's no doubt about it. And people say that, and that's a cliche, but in my case, it's probably very literally true, because outside of my home, I have spent the maximum amount of time in college, and I still continue to refer to it as college because I actually did my undergraduate education there, and it's been the same since. So yeah, I mean, it's been like a second home to me. Obviously, the experience of being a student differs tremendously from being part of the faculty, because more responsibility. I mean, you are no longer responsible only for yourself, but a certain, a certain collective that you are responsible for. So yes, of course, that changed. But I mean, I had a pretty normal college life, so to speak. I mean, I had a lot of fun with friends, and there are lots of rumors floating around about how NUJS is an institution which encourages people to live their life a little. So, I'm not doing anything to dispel that myth. It's not a myth. If you were to ask me, of course, opinions may differ. But yes, it also did open up a lot of opportunities, and I chose to do what I chose to do primarily because I was just interested in the way the whole pedagogy of teaching works. I was interested in it from the very beginning, simply because I could tell that I would probably be able to do this in a way that I'd want to be taught, because I was one of the backbenchers. So in college, I wasn't the one who'd sit in front and take notes and, nod their heads at the teacher. Nothing wrong with that. It's just that wasn't who I was. I was a person who was, in fact, a challenge for a teacher. I would say that I'd sit at the back and surmise and have conversations with my fellow, what we today call peer-to-peer learning, right? And I was a big proponent of that. I learned a lot from people who were with me, my friends and classmates, as well as seniors and juniors in college. That collegial atmosphere was fantastic. But in class, I was a pretty difficult kid because I was perpetually unimpressed. And I understand how problematic that can be today, now that I have crossed the aisle, so to speak. And I had the same attitude as a lot of people in law school have. I'm not exactly learning much of use. I'm not sure if this is going to be practically beneficial to me, etc., etc. Of course, today that perspective has changed, not just because I've shifted, but because I've kind of understood the value of the lectures that I did pay attention to, that I did enjoy, etc., etc. So yeah, I had a fun college life that way. It was nothing out of the ordinary. But the transition happened when a friend today, colleague, senior colleague, as well as a mentor to me, Professor Shamik Sen, who teaches constitutional law at NUJS, kind of prodded me towards the idea. And I clapped it up because like I said, I'd always thought that I could do this reasonably well. I had done some debating and a little bit of quizzing while I was in school and college. So public speaking wasn't difficult for me. And I always thought about how I could impress the unimpressed backbencher such as myself, how I could draw their attention. And I think in India, generally speaking, very little attention is paid to, if I may, the art of teaching, right? And even within academia, I don't think good teaching is valued as much as good research is. Good teaching is definitely not something that is a criteria for, let's say, career advancement or such, which I find a little baffling, honestly, because especially with the law school structure, you guys get into college right out of school, right? So it's essentially an undergraduate education. And when you're dealing with a 17, 18-year-old, it is very important for you to be able to engage with them at a level where they will feel that they say there is value to this engagement. And it's not just rote learning. I mean, in the era of the internet, it just makes no sense to give somebody a standard lecture on, I don't know, property, because you can get a better lecture by a better professor online. So unless there is the engagement, what are you adding to the class? That's something that had always bothered me. So when Shamik sir made the point that I could probably try joining academia, I kind of lapped it up. And the journey has been so ever since. And I've quite enjoyed myself. I have no regrets, and I definitely have no second thoughts about it. It's probably what I was meant to do anyway. I'm just glad that there was somebody at the right time to give me the right guidance.
Wonderful.
I hope that in life, I'm able to be that person for some people, at least. Yeah.
No, certainly. In fact, I must tell you, I was when I was researching for this interview, I came across the mention of your name on certain websites, which rated you as the best student-rated professor at NUJS. How does that make you feel?
I mean, it's very flattering, of course, but to be honest, I mean, I know what kind of websites you're talking about. I don't put too much credence and things like that. I'm glad that there are some people at least who enjoy my lectures, but I think that's true for a lot of other people. It's not just about the content, but yes, I'm happy about the fact that people are able to speak to me. And I hope that for as long as I am in the profession, as long as I am in teaching, people are still able to speak to me. Because at the end of the day, and I've heard this feedback from a lot of people, that there are brilliant professors everywhere in every institution. You cannot name an institution which does not have a good teacher. I completely believe that every institution has good faculty, every institution has good students. But what happens is that there is not always the ability to connect. I think it also has something to do with age. I am relatively younger, I guess, so it's easier for me to connect. Second is, as I mentioned, I was never exactly the most engaged person in class while a student. So I probably can talk to people at a more equal pedestal than that, and people feel generally comfortable to speak to me about a variety of issues, not necessarily all academic, which I think has been something that I'd want to preserve. So apart from the stuff that I teach in terms of content, that's been something quite humbling, to be honest, because you also feel responsible for what you say. So if somebody comes and asks you for, I don't know, just general know-how or even guidance with regards to what they should do next, it just imposes on you so much responsibility. What comes out of your mouth next could be an important step in somebody's life. So, I mean, that sense of responsibility kind of, I think, is very humbling, and I'm very glad and very grateful that people have allowed me that space. Students at NUJS and outside have always allowed me that space to be my own person. That is, I think, the biggest boon of teaching. That, I mean, you can be anything on the spectrum, so long you're doing your job well. There is, I think, enough scope for acceptance. So I'm not the run-of-the-mill lecturer in law school. I know that because I engage with people at a certain level, and I allow them to engage back with me at the same level. And I do that very consciously. That's very much part of the way I teach. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. I didn't do it thinking about whether it's going to make me better or worse. I just thought that that's the person I am, and I cannot be an inauthentic version of who I am for a career which will probably go on for, like, I don't know, 30 years if I'm alive. So I might as well, do what I am. And I'm very, very grateful to people for allowing me to be that person, allowing me not to morph into the distant lecturer who just, imparts knowledge. I'm glad that that space was allowed to me. At least NUJS has always been very kind that way.
Right. Agnida, staying on the subject and coming to the issue of academia, well, not really an issue, just the topic of academia. So I'm in my fourth year right now, and everyone is thinking about what they want to do later on. And the conversations, at least in my peer group, is that, well, if we aren't able to meet the demands of litigation or corporate law firms, academia is always something that we can go to. It's going to be less demanding, we get a steady paycheck and so on. I somehow feel that's not the true picture, because academia must present its own problems, its own internal politics and so on. So as an academic, sir, Agnida, can you paint us a true picture of what it means to be an academic? Take us through what a regular day in your life looks like, what kind of responsibilities do you have other than teaching, and anything else that you feel future want to be academics should know.
Yeah. I'm glad that we have segued into this part of the conversation, because I've always found it very difficult to speak about myself. So this is the part I'm more comfortable with. Thank you for finally getting there. Yes, you're very right that impression exists out there that academia is somehow more chill than the conventional careers in law. I will first caveat what I'm going to say by saying that I have taught at only 2 institutions. So whatever I am going to say, please take it with a pinch of salt, maybe more than a pinch of salt, because that may not be true for a number of other institutions of different kinds. Second, caveat number 2 is that no matter when you say that, paint a true picture for us, it's always like the blind man and the elephant. If you catch the trunk, you will think the entire elephant is the trunk, but it is not that, right? So we all get only a glimpse of what is the true picture, if there is any such thing. And so I'm essentially sharing my perspective. At best, it is a very limited perspective. So take it with maybe a bag of salt. But yeah, just to come to the substance of the question you're asking, I don't think academia is easier than other professions. It's just that the demands are different. So if you ask me to objectively tell you whether it's easier or harder, that completely depends on the kind of academic you want to be. So let us just break this down. And now I feel like I'm back in the classroom. Let's break this down. Who is an academic? Is an academic somebody who essentially goes to the classroom, takes class, publishes a few op-eds and a journal article from time to time, and maybe in 5 years' time, publishes a book? If that is your definition of an academic, there is a certain amount of work you can do and get away with it. But if you're an academic who is by definition reflective, somebody who is concerned with the goings on in the world, then it no longer remains a job. And that's essentially where I think we kind of go off the rails when it comes to this is a secure job which gets you a paycheck at the end of the day. And it's a choice. I'm not attaching a value judgment to it, because I personally believe that it's absolutely valid for people to be on both ends of the spectrum and be equally happy if that is what you want to be, and be equally successful if that is what you want to be, and be equally both. Because it is not necessary that somebody who is going in and teaching in class and is primarily a teacher is doing any less than a person who does a lot of writing and maybe like less classes. You've got both classes of people, and both classes are important because they contribute different things. But objectively speaking, are you going to be working less hours than in litigation? Possibly. Are you going to be will you have to receive a phone call at 11 o'clock at night from your boss at the law firm? Definitely not. I don't expect that, and I've never had to. Right? That's at least been my experience. I don't know about others. Right? But if you have the ambition of being somebody who's in tune with the times, somebody who's going to write relatively regularly and write about issues of importance, comment on issues of importance, and develop their scholarship side by side with teaching responsibilities, at least at the national law schools, at least at my national law school, then most certainly it is a lot of work. It is definitely not something that you can justify with paychecks, because again, speaking from the perspective of somebody who's in a public university, it's not about the paycheck. And I know they say this about a lot of professions, but if you're in academia, it cannot be about the paycheck. If you're in it for the paycheck, there are better things to do. And I think I don't need to explain this. It's pretty self-explanatory. Every other thing that you can get in through after a law degree is more lucrative than academia, both in the short and the long run. Right. I'm talking about monetarily lucrative, right? Financially lucrative than academia. So if you're taking up academia, then it is a matter of choice. But is it the choice that you thought it was? Possibly not. Because even if you just do what you call the bare minimum to stay afloat, in 5 years' time, you'd want a promotion. In 10 years' time, you'd want another thing, and so on and so forth. And in maybe 20 years' time, you'd want to get into administration. Maybe you'd want to chair professorship, etc. For all of these different goals, because even within a so-called, not so demanding profession, there are people with ambition. And ambition is so intrinsic to the human being that you cannot say that I will get to this and stagnate. That's the plan you have, and then it doesn't work. Because very soon you see that, okay, my peers are doing X, Y, and Z, and so I must also make up for it. So it kind of pushes you to do things a certain way. I really feel that academia is what you make of it, because it's a platform which allows people to be a variety of things. And all of them are valid, and all of them are legit, right? To choose any one of them is as valid as the next thing. But yes, it is definitely more work than you expect it to be.
Right. You brought up the topic of teaching at a public university, which is where you have primarily taught. But we see more and more people, when at least in the student peer group that I have had conversations with, the intention is that, look, if we can make it to certain private universities, the monetary returns wouldn't be as less as they are in a public university. Some of the universities in the private sphere, from what I make of it as an outsider, tend to pay recruits relatively well. But what's your take on teaching at a public versus a private university in terms of, academic freedom, in terms of job security, in terms of being who you are as a person and not being dissuaded by the university philosophy, so to speak? What's your perspective on that?
That's actually a good question, to which I can only give you a partial answer, because I've not taught at a private university. Right. I have, for a very short period, been employed as a guest lecturer at a private university around Kolkata, but I don't think that's the kind of university you're talking about. Without naming names, because that's not what we do. People, increasingly young people, people who are getting, who want to enter academia, are lured to join private universities, and they have very good reason to. Let me caveat my response by saying that I have been extremely privileged throughout life in various different ways, but I've been extremely privileged to be allowed to pursue a career in teaching in a private university. My bad, public university, because it takes time, and because tenure does not come easy. There's a long waiting process, and there's a long that entire gestation period. I was supported by my parents. I made enough to live by, but live on my own that way. But in various other ways, I was definitely supported by my parents. I stayed with them, for instance. I still do. Stayed with them. I still stay with them, etc. So in many of these ways, I am very privileged. So one should keep in mind that, without getting unnecessarily idealistic. I also did not have any financial burdens when I graduated from law school. So I did not have a loan to pay back. I did not have any of these other factors to think about. I could just be my own person, which I'm extremely grateful for in hindsight. And I recognize that a large number of people do not have that privilege. It is because of that I could choose to teach where I wanted to teach. If I did not have that choice, where I would have landed up may have been very, very different. Incidentally, that's true for my LL.M right now as well, that because of the university turning in a very generous financial aid, probably because of my bank balance in part, is why I am able to go back and rejoin my university and continue to teach at a private university. I understand that people have the ambition of studying abroad, as I did myself. Yeah. And once they've done that, they've accumulated a certain amount of financial burden, which they now have to, pay off over time. And obviously, that's the financial aspect of it is a big question. The private universities that you are referring to are places which pay a lot more. Let's just put it bluntly. They pay a lot more. Somebody who, let's say, I might have taught a few years back and who has just joined academia as, I don't know what, I think it's called the assistant lecturer or lecturer, etc., probably making more money than I am right now. Wow. Which is the kind of divergence there is. So it's absolutely, it makes a lot of sense for them to do that. When you come to questions like academic freedom, and okay, just to clarify, I have nothing ideologically against teaching in private universities. And if I did, that would be a personal decision, and it is a personal decision. Sure. But the factors are not based on whether it's privately held, privately owned or not. For many people, that might be a stumbling block, and I recognize that. But as far as academic freedom and the other aspects are concerned, I have never felt that there is any lack of academic freedom at NUJS or the various other places I've taught. The difference, I believe, is in the standards of service, so the condition of service. And that is a very big difference. And that's something that we have to grapple with on a daily basis. While NUJS allows you, and all the national law schools allow you to primarily teach whatever curriculum you come up with, you have the freedom to do those things. There's a lot more you have to worry about on a daily basis, part of which is the administrative work, part of which is, stuff that you thought you did not sign up for, but a part of the job, right? So you don't, some universities I've heard do, but for instance, my university does not have a system of a TA who let's say assists with grading. Most of us don't have what you call an office assistant in that sense, somebody who can, help you out with some part of the admin work. So a lot of the burden of the administrative work does fall on you. And that takes away time, energy, and often eats away at a lot of your patience. So the amount of time you get while working at these private universities as an individual, simply because of the size of the universities, right? If you have 300 faculty who are all teaching various aspects of law, no matter how many students you have, the work does, I guess, at a granular level, the work does decrease per capita, which unfortunately does not happen. But there's a flip side to it, I must add. The flip side is that there is an aspect of recognition that comes with it. If you put in effort and people can see that you're putting in effort, and because there are so few people, you get noticed more. Yeah. Which amongst 300 people, you may be lost, right? So I think that these are important trade-offs that one has to make while taking a call on these things. But from what I have heard, and I have heard various perspectives, there is a certain amount of academic freedom that these universities are offering. There is a certain quality of service, and there is definitely a salary which is very lucrative. And all of these things are driving a lot of our talent towards these universities. And I don't say that that's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, the place I'm studying at right now is private, right? Uh, I'm not so hung up about the badges. I'm not so hung up about the ownership. I just think that if you can produce socially desirable results, then of course we can get into a discussion about what is socially desirable, who defines it, etc. But let's not lawyer each other. If we can produce socially desirable results from through private money, I am okay with it personally.
Yeah. But that's a very interesting perspective and surely a lot to think about, Agnida. Moving forward, there's just a very small but I think vitally important question that I must ask. When discussing of careers, at least in our society, money isn't really a part of the discussion, even though it's at the back of everyone's mind. It's still somehow considered taboo. So, like you said, you shouldn't really get into academia for monetary returns. There's something else much deeper and visceral at play. But at the same time, we had just now had the conversation how private universities tend to pay significantly more than a public university. Is it at all possible, so for the benefit of our viewers who wish to get into academia, is it possible to put a number as to what the range of the salary might be? Because there's very little information on the internet about this. So drawing on your experience and conversations with others, can you put a number for the benefit of our viewers?
Let me first try to clarify what seems like two contradictory positions. I said that you shouldn't get into academia for the money because as relative to all other fields of law that you get into, academia will always pay you less.
Sure.
So,
right.
I mean, I'd say that somebody with 5 to 7 years of litigation experience in a reasonably mobile court will make it up to a certain extent. And I don't think that should be the driving force behind you getting into academia, because you'll end up being disappointed, right? Second, are there ways in which you can make good money in academia? Yes, absolutely. There are. Irrespective of where you're at. In fact, you can do that. But are you thus motivated? That's a question you have to ask yourself. As far as the question of putting a number to it with regard to the private university, I actually have no clue. I have heard such a varied range of numbers from people that it is astonishing how such a variance is accommodated within a setup. But I'm presuming that happens because there are personally negotiated contracts, which I believe depend, at least some factors that they consider are where you've been educated from, which universities you've attended, what kind of work experience you bring to the plate, what kind of subjects you teach perhaps. So considering all of these factors, I think they come to a personally negotiated number at which they are, which is very different from the situation at the NLUs, for instance, because our salary is predetermined. It's not something that you can negotiate.
As per the pay commission, I suppose.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. So since these are government institutes in a way, so you get paid as per the pay commission, and depending on where you're situated, which law school, it depends. Either they will pay you whatever is the UGC's rate at which for payment, or the state's own pay commission, whatever that is determined. So yes, you're right that number is not available easily. Once upon a time I tried looking, that number wasn't available easily, so you'll have to do the calculation based on the pay matrix that is available on let's say the UGC website, and the rules. So but I can tell you this, that if you begin as an assistant professor at any national law university, you will not make anything less than to the best of my knowledge, nothing less than 60,000 rupees a year. It could be slightly higher, so don't absolutely quote me on that. You must better check. But because the 7th pay commission came in after I joined work, so I'm not exactly sure whether starting is right now, and there may be some regional variance.
Sure.
So if some universities follow the state, as in the state in which they are a part, If they follow the state's pay commission, then they will probably be paying slightly less than the center, and so on and so forth. So these variations are there. But I think on the whole, you can definitely expect something above and over and above 60,000 rupees a month after taxes.
Right.
So
Thanks for that perspective. It's helpful,
yeah,
actually.
it could be a little more than that. Could be. I don't think it's going to be less. So
This is in fact, it's a very important conversation, and I hope that viewers find it useful. So moving on, one more question with regard to academia and recruitments is where a person obtains their LLM from. So while some students have the advantage of obtaining a fancy foreign LLM degree, which obviously holds people in good stead, not everyone has that privilege, and some choose to, for whatever reasons, pursue an LLM from India. So for someone who wants to be a professor, assistant professor, where they have obtained their LLM matters in terms of recruitment?
See, that's a difficult question to answer. But I can tell you this, that there have been enough and more people with Indian LLMs who have managed to make it in academia, who have been recruited, including myself. The point of time at which I got recruited, I had an Indian LLM. I had an LLM from NUJS. And so did, I think, a large majority of people who were recruited around the same time at various national law schools. Right. So if you go purely by the numbers, there is nothing to suggest that a foreign LLM gives you an edge in that sense. For me, the considerations were different, but I'll come to that later. As far as at least the recruitment to government and universities, public universities are concerned, I do not think that they make a material difference. They may, of course, give you a talking point in an interview. That's one. And it makes sense for that to be the case, right? Despite the growing number of people who are obtaining their LLMs from abroad, just by numbers, they cannot match the number of people who are getting LLMs from India. Right. And just the number of vacancies that are out there in this various law schools and law universities and colleges across the country, we kind of focus on the NLUs, we kind of focus on DU maybe, and a couple of other places. And we don't really talk about the recruitments that are happening across the country in various state universities, etc. If you look at the entire picture, I do not think that empirically there is any evidence to suggest that an Indian LLM disadvantages you. A foreign LLM might advantage you, which is a completely different idea, right? If you walk into the room and say, I've got an LLM from X university, maybe they'll ask you a couple of other questions relating to your work there, relating to your time there. They might expect you to know something, say a comparative perspective, which they would not require somebody with an Indian LLM to answer. So yeah, you can definitely create a better impression and have a greater talking point, but I don't think that it is a disadvantage to have an Indian LLM purely from the purpose of getting recruited to an Indian college or university. If you have done the formalities, which is an LLM with net, and I think from 2023 is going to be an LLM with or without net and a PhD. Right. And so long you've met those formalities, I don't think there's any empirical evidence to suggest that you cannot get the job. Of course, always remember that these are only the minimum. This is the floor, not the ceiling. So there are things like publications and conferences and what other research you have done and what teaching experience you bring to the book. All of these things are relevant. My entire, I would think that it's fair to say that almost the entirety of my interview at NUJS and the place before, all of these consisted of the work I did. Nobody focused so much on, where I studied. That was on the menu, right? They had every recruiter usually has, everybody on the panel usually has a copy of your CV. Sure. So they know where you studied and what you've done. So the conversation they're having is more about the subject. So I would say that the one thing that definitely stands out, since you are asking me this question, it's probably taking a detour, but I think the one thing that does stand out is your command over the subject that you claim to know, the command of the subject that you claim to teach. So for instance, I went in and the question that was asked me was, what is the subject you specialize in? And I said that I teach the law of privacy, which is not, what you call a mainstream subject, right? Yeah. But the judgment on the law of privacy had just come out. So I was very fortunate that way, that people had a lot to talk about with regard to that issue. And I got questioned on it for 20 minutes. The
Wow.
entire reason I believe that I finally did manage to secure the job was that I could answer all but one, right? And I could do that because I had read the judgment and whatever. So I'd done my preparation. Everybody who goes in for an interview, I believe, does the preparation. Be sure to know your material. Be sure to have command over the subject that you claim to teach. And just as an extra pointer, something that I had faced, the question is that, okay, you say you specialize in this niche area of law, but what about the subjects that we need you to teach? So understand
Right.
what the demand of the job is. It's a teaching job. So if it's a teaching job, then the purpose for them hiring you is for you to give them certain value. It can't only be your research interest. So
For
the
sure.
university is not going to tune their curriculum towards your research interest. You have to tune a bit of your time to what the university might be interested in, which are, let's say, the basic subjects, the bar council mandated subjects. So which ones among those would you be okay with teaching, which you would be comfortable with teaching? And they'll ask you questions on that. So if you, for instance, said jurisprudence, they'll ask you questions on jurisprudence, which you should be prepared to answer. So think about how you bring value to the book rather than thinking about, okay, what I don't have, because a large majority of people will not have a foreign degree. I didn't have one, right?
Right.
So that's, I think,
That's a great perspective, Agnida, and thanks for explaining it in such detail. I'm sure this is of help to anyone who's wanting to pursue a career in academia. Moving forward, now let's talk about the juicy stuff, which is why I think most people are here to understand your Harvard LLM application process. Before
yeah,
anything, going further, so this is your second LLM. The basic question would be, why not
why?
just do a PhD instead? That's
Yeah,
more
yeah, yeah,
useful
yeah,
for a career in academia. So can you talk to us
absolutely.
about that?
Absolutely, and not only are you not the first person to say that, I think a large number of my friends and well-wishers, many of whom had done foreign degrees themselves, were of the opinion that I should not be, taking this detour and settling here. But I decided to come for a taught program for two reasons primarily. One is a jurisdictional question. I was planning to specialize in technology and law, and there was no program. I think some programs in India have opened up in the course of the last couple of years which teach this, but prior to that there were no programs which teach a master's level taught program in law and technology. So I
Right.
had to definitely go abroad to learn a little more. Otherwise I would have been a purely self-taught person in the field, which while it's admirable for those who manage to do it, I did not have the confidence, to be very frank with you. I felt that I needed to learn more. I felt that my own research was insufficient. It was sufficient enough to teach a class, probably the basics of a subject, but I did not think I had the depth to delve into questions which even I found difficult to find answers to. And I definitely needed more classroom time. I definitely needed to talk to people who were in the field for longer, and not just the Indian names and not just the people who were working in the country, because there were a few, but I needed to just basically broaden my horizons with regard to the subject. So that was the reason behind applying for the LLM. And can you just repeat the question? I think I've lost.
Why not do a PhD? But I think
Why?
this answers
That's
that.
correct. That's right. That's right. But yeah, I mean, it kind of does. I've always felt that a lot of people tell me that the PhD has the flexibility for you to go attend some classes. But having a long history of being a backbencher tells me that unless there's a deadline, you probably will not end up turning in your paper. If you thought that you're going to go in the class and there's no evaluation and there's just a random discussion, I think most of us, especially who come to the LLM at the age at which I have come, kind of know enough to manage to bypass the system, so to speak, unless there is some kind of a check and balance. I am not very self-disciplined, to be honest. So I thought that this was important for me, but it's not just because of that factor. It's also because of the fact that a taught program, I feel, is a lot more rigorous and it has more expectations of you, which a PhD may or may not have, because it's completely dependent on how you decide to frame your question. I did not feel that I had the clarity to write about exactly what I want to, or even to have come up with a subject which I'm excited about to work on for X number of years. So while I had ideas, they seemed a little thin, and I wanted to, get into a more rigorous curriculum where day in, day out, I'm thinking about an issue, some part of which has fortunately happened. So I'm glad I'm glad I took the call.
No, right, definitely. You went into your second LLM with a considerable work experience, that too in academia for LLM, which is predominantly a research-based degree. And then there are a lot of students who go into LLM immediately after law school, which you also did with your first
Yes.
LLM, but with specific regard to foreign LLMs. But do you think
Yeah.
that going for a higher education abroad with some prior work experience, it could be anything in any field that a person is interested in, does that make your LLM experience more fruitful than if you go with just your undergrad degree?
So two things. Number one is, the answer to your ultimate question is yes, absolutely. And there's a strategic reason you should do that. The strategic reason is that you're probably going to end up getting a better deal, or if I may call it that, you'll end up getting a better deal in terms of the university, as well as in terms of maybe financial aid. For my case, it was certainly that. You may end up getting a better deal in various ways, not just the learning aspect of it, but even just getting through will become easier if you can show a certain amount of work X. So, I mean, there's nothing wrong with applying right out of college, but at least my experience has been that had I come here earlier, as I think I mentioned earlier in an answer, that had I come here earlier, I would have taken back a little less than what I'm being able to take back today. Right. So yes, it definitely does do that. Of course, there are those people I have had the pleasure of teaching and interacting with who are those who have matured in their thoughts, so to speak, and they are aware of the subject in which they want to study. Their specializations are kind of fixed in their minds. They've already read the literature. They've already done the groundwork. For these exceptional category of people, a degree right out of college may make a lot of sense. If you're not within that group, and you should be slightly self-aware about this, I would say that, do an assessment of yourself and figure out if you belong to that group or not. By extraordinary, I don't mean extraordinary purely on merit, or as in academic results, if merit roughly translated in this context to mean academic results. It's not just that, but if you are somebody who's clear about their focus, right? Who are clear about the kind of work that they want to do, who are clear about the kind of LLM they want, who are clear about the kind of courses they want, who are clear about the universities they're applying to. All of these are different and difficult questions. Then maybe it makes sense to apply for an LLM right out of law school. Otherwise, I would say that a couple of years of work experience could definitely be a lot more useful, both in terms of getting through to the degree as well as what you take back from the degree. Your ability to absorb, I think, increases with it. Having said that, I must also caveat it by saying, if you push it to too late, that comes with a different set of challenges, right? If you've taken a too long a hiatus from your studying in a classroom, then yes, you might have to burn more of the midnight oil than those of your peers who have come to law school after maybe 2-3 years of work X.
Yeah. No, definitely. Yeah. So now let's jump into the application process of Harvard, because that can be a daunting challenge. I think it follows a slightly distinct process insofar as it requires you to write an essay on a contemporary legal issue. So can you just quickly walk our viewers through the application process?
Yeah, sure. So the application process is reasonably straightforward, because the website has all the details about how you should apply, what kind of essays are required, what are the lengths of those essays. They give you sample essays easily available on the internet, of both kinds, the personal statement as well as the statement of study or purpose or whatever you want to call it. All of these are easily available. So I'm not going to spend time doing that. You can find all of that out on the internet. Instead, what I can tell you about is this, that, and I think this might just be useful, is that, and this is a question I get asked quite a lot, that did you write one essay or did you write a separate essay for each university you applied to?
Right.
Now, now that is something very interesting, because I did both.
Wow.
So for some universities where I was focused on a particular type of program, or I wanted to study a particular type of theme, I did apply to some universities which did not have a tech law program, for instance, right? So I applied to, say, the University of Melbourne, where I was looking primarily at regulatory work, regulatory studies, that kind of stuff, because they don't really have out and out tech program, at least from what I could tell. They have courses, of course, but they don't have an out and out specialization in tech. So I was looking at more regulatory stuff. So when I applied to certain universities in the UK who had a tech LLM, I would apply for the tech LLM specifically. So I'd have a tech LLM essay ready. I would also have another essay which was more general, which I could, maneuver for a number of other kinds of applications. That's the kind of prep I do. But the most important thing when it comes to, going through your essays is to get it read by people who have done it before. There is no way that your first draft is going to be a fantastic draft.
Sure.
I don't care who you are. Your first draft is not the one you submitted in most cases. Of course, there are rare cases of some people who have that kind of rare genius. But I guess for a large majority of us, it was a process of continuously polishing your essay till it gets to a certain level which is acceptable and you can send it across to universities. And this process, I keep saying, without friends, you just nothing in life. At least in my life, that is the one realization I take back, that the group of people who help and support you kind of make you who you are. And in my case, my friends have been incredibly helpful. From reading my essay to editing my essay to just giving me general feedback and general morale boosting, because it's a long process, right?
Yeah.
It's a grueling process. It goes on for months, and you make an application and then there's another deadline in 15 days, and you're juggling with work and academics and this and that. So it can kind of get very daunting. And the encouragement that you receive from people close to you is also very, very important. At least for me, it ensured that I remained sane through the process, which became difficult, especially because I was teaching 3 courses. Over the course of a 4-month period, I was teaching 3 courses.
Wow.
And evaluating and doing all of that and writing my application at the same time. So it's a testament to the amount of support that I received. And I also recognize that not everyone is lucky enough to receive that kind of support. But make sure, even if you don't know X number of people who can probably read your essay, etc., make sure to have a certain amount of support, because this time is going to be grueling.
Yeah.
Make sure that you send it to a professor or to, let's say, somebody who you think can give you good feedback on your essay. Find out who these people are. Make sure to zero in on the people who can write your recommendations. And I'm preempting a question you're about to ask me on the recommendation.
Your teacher instincts are very sharp.
Yes. Very, very crucial to identify those people early in the process. Very, very crucial to ensure that you get personalized recommendations, that people don't write you a generic piece. Of course, you can't check, but what you can definitely do is the kind of people you are approaching. So a lot of questions about whether we should go to somebody who's really big in the field or we should go to somebody who knows us more personally. I have stuck to primarily the second sort. Of course, they are very important people in their field also, but they're not what you call, without meaning any disrespect, I mean to say that they're not what you call superstars or anything of that sort. I went to people who knew me well, and even if they were not the people they are, even if they did not, let's say, were not directors of institutes and so forth, even if they were professors, I would have gone to the same exact set of people. Because for me, I always felt, and I don't know to what extent this is true, but this has been my experience, that the quality of your recommendation, the content of your recommendation means more to most people than who writes it.
Right.
This, you will get the exact, let me caveat this by saying, you will get the exact opposite advice from a large number of people. Yeah. It may have been that which succeeded for them. This worked for me, so I will continue to stick to this idea. There are any number of people who will tell you the opposite, and maybe even that is valid. I didn't know anyone who was what you call a heavyweight in the same sense.
Yeah.
I had not clerked, for instance, at any court, so I didn't have a judge who knew me personally well enough to write me a recommendation. Similarly, I didn't, let's say, or any other kind of venture. I hadn't, let's say, worked at a firm where a partner could have written me a recommendation. I worked in academia. I'd done my bit here, so I got my professors to write for me, and I think a personalized reco makes a lot of difference, irrespective of which side of the spectrum you fall in. Make sure to zero in on 3-4 people. Always keep a reserve. 3-4 people who you want
Hmm.
to be your recommenders. Make sure to speak to them and clearly explain what you expect of them. Make sure to follow up with them. It's not their responsibility. It is in part, but it is also your responsibility. So these are things which I think one can be prepared. If one is prepared with, it will make the very long and arduous process a little less hectic, and especially towards the end.
Right. And Agnida, you correctly preempted two of my questions and answered them during your previous one. So wonderful. But one more question with regard to letters of recommendation. Can you send, so for instance, let's say Harvard requires, I do not know how many it requires. Let's assume it requires 2. So you have received 2 LORs. Can those same LORs be sent to other institutions as well, or you need a different LOR for each one?
So that kind of depends on the process. So if you're applying to, say, for instance, the US, it's done through a centralized repository called the LSAC, right? So when you're uploading recommendations to the LSAC, those recommendations go out to all universities in the US, or all those that are affiliated to the LSAC, which is mostly everyone. If there is a process outside of the LSAC, the university wants you directly to apply to them, then there's a different process that you have to follow. For instance, Harvard expects you to apply according to their process, but they do accept LSAC based. Yeah, they do accept the letters of recommendation that you have uploaded for other universities on LSAC. So again, also they also accept, I think, the vetted. Do check me on that, but I think they do. As far, it's been a while since I applied, so I'll check that and maybe update it. But I think they accept that, and they also accept the verification of the mark sheets that LSAC does and sends directly. For a large number of other universities, for instance, in the UK, it's an individualized process. For instance, outside the UK, I applied to the University of Melbourne, I applied to NUS Singapore, and both of these places I had to send in separate, personalized, specific recommendations for their programs. But if you have if you have a structure for a recommendation, since I've had the chance of writing a few recommendations myself before I applied, the structure of the recommendation remains the same. It's just a couple of lines here and there that you have to change, because your opinion of the person does not change based on where they're applying, right? So that remains constant. It's just the name of the program and some other small details that need to be changed. So it's not a lot of work in that sense. But yes, remember, because I have been on the other side, remember that your recommenders, irrespective of who they are and how much, they're doing you a huge favor, because this is something that they don't need to do. So it is your responsibility primarily to do the following up. It is your responsibility to, give them a lay of the land before. So if you're planning to apply to, say, 5 universities, and you initially say, okay, I'm going to do 2, so just write 2, and then you write 2, and then you find out 3 more are there, you understand that their time is also valuable.
Sure.
So be very clear about what you're planning to do. Minor changes are fine, but make sure that you give them an idea of what they are to expect in the months to come. Right. That helps them also plan better from earlier.
Right. And Agnida, just backtracking a little, you said that your focus of study was quite clear. You wanted a tech law-based program, and that's how you fine-tuned your statement of purpose. But for some people, and this could be a large majority, so you want me to take a minute?
No. Okay. I'm just adjusting the volume.
Yeah, sure. So for a large number of people, they might not have narrowed down on an area of specialization. The broad goal might be, to just study at Yale, study at Oxbridge. And, that's just what they want to do. And I think that's fair enough. So for people like those, how do you structure an LOR?
I would ask them to take a couple of years to think about what they want to do before they apply it. Because if the kind of universities you are talking about, I don't think you can actually write a generic recommendation. Similarly, you cannot write a generic application. There are some universities which would probably consider those, but the ones that you mentioned, to the best of my understanding, are not of the kind. So if you're saying that I want to do the BCL, you better tell them what your focus is. You better tell them why you want to do the BCL. If those answers are not clear to you, and you just want to study at Oxford, I don't think it works like that. Okay. Right? So in order for you to justify your desire to study somewhere, it can't just be the brand, right? It has to be something more than that. So in order for you to justify studying there, you must first reflect as to why you want to do the LLM. For instance, if you're somebody who's going to go into litigation and you're from a certain kind of background, and suppose you're the first generation lawyer in the family and you want to go get a foothold in litigation, and you don't have a court in your hometown. For such a person, straight out of the bat, would I recommend going for an LLM? I don't know. I don't think that LLM would have tremendous utility for this person, right? If they want to, unless they want to shift from their career, if they want to come back and still do litigation at the same place, I don't know to what extent the LLM will be tremendously useful. Of course, it will give you exposure. Of course, you learn 10 different things. Of course, you learn to think in a different way. But in terms of material benefits, I'm not certain if that material benefit is justifiable, especially if you're going to spend money for it. If you get anything for free, you should take it. That's the advice I give everyone, right? Nothing in academia is free, unfortunately. Anything that you get for free, you should take it. But if it's not free, if you're going to spend money on it, then you might as well ask yourself these questions first, right? Why am I doing the LLM? What is the purpose? Will I gain anything out of it? Because if you say that I'm going to gain perspective, what difference is it going to make to you if you're going to be, let's say, working in M&A, right? And that too back in India. I'm not talking about those who intend to settle outside. So whether it is useful to you right now, and I'm going to receive a lot of flack on your comment section for this if this is viewed by enough people. I think a very large number, I will not put a number to it because that would not be fair, but a very large number of people are doing the LLM out of a fear of missing out. They're doing it because everybody else they sit on a floor with at their law firm is doing an LLM or has done an LLM or plans to do an LLM. So it's unfortunate, but higher education has become primarily about peer pressure.
Yeah.
At least with regard to the limited space of NLU students, NLU graduates wanting to do LLM, a large majority of them want to do LLMs because it's the thing to do next. They have no idea with regard to whether they're going to pursue that exact course because, again, a very large number of them change track or change discipline or change concentration the moment they get to the university because they found some other course which they got interested in, which is completely fair. There is nothing wrong with it. I'm not criticizing it. I'm just saying it's not a very well thought out strategy.
Yeah.
If you see that it gives you a certain benefit, if it gives you, say, for instance, access to market, absolutely go for it. But how many people, say, for instance, end up taking the New York bar and staying back here as corporate lawyers? Just look at the numbers, look at the percentage. The percentage is quite low. So you can't have that at the back of your mind. This is essentially what I will do. Of course, I mean, if you're very motivated and that's what you want to end up doing, go ahead. But do give it another think. I know why I'm here. I'm not so sure because lawyers are very good at giving you answers or responses to questions. So somebody's going to give you a very smart answer to why they're here. But if you, in their heart of hearts, they'll know that they don't have a very strong justification.
Yeah.
So don't do the LLM because it's like a fashionable thing to do. It just makes no sense. It's a waste of a year. And from the perspective of a litigating advocate, for instance, what are you wasting? You're wasting seniority. You're wasting seniority. You're wasting the time when you could have actually learned something under the tutelage of a practitioner, which is more than what you will for certain at a US law school. For certain at a US law school. Because I've learned more American law than I have learned anything else. And is that going to be useful? No. But the perspective it gives me is useful to my writing and to my research and my thinking. So I know why I'm here. I don't know why a lot of people are. Right?
Yeah.
And I know this is not going to be a popular statement or sentiment because there's an entire industry which is being developed around this LLM process. And there are people who are, I don't know, spending any amount of money to try and get trained and to model their CV and their SOPs and this and that, and all of that is justifiable if there is any value to it. If the value is the increase in status, I don't know how I look at that. Let's just put it that way.
That's a very interesting perspective, and I've had conversations.
That's a very controversial perspective. You're going to get a lot of hits out of it.
No, I wish I wish Letter of Law was big enough to receive any sort of hate, but
that is why I said it.
Yeah.
Just dive into the data without too many people throwing brickbats.
Yeah. No, in the back of my mind, I'm going to take this particular clip, put it out,
Clip and
generate
put
some
it up. Yeah,
controversy, get those views.
yeah, yeah.
But that's a
Put up
very
a clickbaity caption also maybe with it.
interesting. Right.
Most people don't know why they're doing the LLM. Sounds nice. Yeah, yeah,
It does.
yeah.
But I've had this particular conversation with a lot of people on the podcast so far, and I always get different answers, and this is a
Yeah.
very new perspective as well. One
Mhm.
reason that I feel a lot of people, especially from non-law schools, which are called quote unquote tier 2, tier 3 law schools, do LLM, in my view, is also to shed the baggage of their undergrad law school, because for
Absolutely.
5 years, they're judged on the basis of where they went to law school, despite their merit, and merit in the general sense in terms of how capable they are, what they've published, what they've written, facing constant rejections from internships and so on, just because they've belonged to a certain law school. I think that's a great motivation to sort of shed that undergrad law school baggage and try to get at par with your peers. That's one view as well on the forum. And I mean, viewers are of course, happy to have their own perspective. I mean, everyone
I
should.
completely agree with you. I completely agree with you. And I see that to be a great motivating factor amongst people who are not in national law schools or are part of the quote unquote academic elite of legal education. But if I may, and I know you're not asking me this question, but
No, no, please. Right.
I'm just generally putting forward my view. Yes, it's true that if you go to one of the, you know, fancy universities, one of the more reputed ones, you will end up probably shedding the baggage where you come from. But having been on both sides of that spectrum, let me tell you this, that if a person from X national law school, who is your peer at the top Ivy college that you've gone to, uh, in their eyes, your estimation is not going to increase, because they're going to continue to judge you on that basis, which is a horrid way of thinking, but that has been so ingrained. I mean, I did this. I keep talking to my students when I get the chance about privilege and merit and our incredibly flawed ideas of it. The fact of the matter is, if I did not have X amount of money, I would not be here.
Yeah.
That is, and I'm talking about myself. I would not be here unless I could afford. Yes, I'm not taking money from home, but if I did not have the ability to pay back the loan that I have taken, and it is a considerable amount of money, if I did not have the ability to do that, I wouldn't be here. So this degree is a bonus for me. For a lot of people, they want to shed this baggage, but they're working. Again, it's the motivation that matters. If your ability to shed the baggage comes at no cost, go ahead. If it comes at no cost to you, go ahead, which means you have enough money and whatever else required to do it. If it comes only from the motivation that I will be elevated in the eyes of my peers, if you're talking about your national law school peers, and without criticizing or taking away from anyone, I'm just trying to tell you what I feel is the truth
Yeah.
of the matter. We are elitist, and our feet have moved up from the ground a long time ago, and it will take a long time for us to be able to get our feet back on the ground. The earlier we do it, the better. But the philosophy that the national law schools run on currently, at least the students I'm talking about, is that they're better. And I felt this when I was a student. I can't blame other people for things that I've done myself. I felt this myself. That, oh, I've done something fantastic by clearing this exam and getting here. I think staying in Calcutta helped to some extent keep my feet on the ground, because they just, the conversations are such. But whatever be my individual case, the fact is that I don't think it's going to elevate your image in front of anyone else. Of course, if there is a senior who's going to take you into their chamber because you've come back after doing a degree at a non-law school, you've gone abroad to a fancy university and got a degree, and the senior is going to take you based on that. And that recruitment, or that becoming a junior to that person is so important to you that you can do it, go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead, but not otherwise. I don't think it makes sense simply to drop baggage which you do not carry.
Yeah.
It is the baggage that you're talking about is in your mind. Yes, if you're talking about the qualitative difference in terms of teaching, I'm sorry if I'm taking too long on
No,
this
no, no.
answer,
Please,
but
please
it's
go
something
ahead.
that
This is, yeah.
I've felt very strongly about for a long time. If you
Right.
feel that the quality of education you received at the university that you went to was inferior, First, you have no empirical proof of that because you haven't gone to a national law school. How do you know that they're teaching something superior? Second, it is usually about methodology, not so much about content. I can write you a blank document which will say what percentage of people in my classes have learned the content of what I taught them. It's not about the content. You can learn the content. It's on the internet. You and I are having the first proper conversation we've had, and you can learn the exact content that I teach in class because it's all available freely on the internet, right? It's not about that. It's about the approach. It's about what do I teach? I don't teach content. I don't teach them this is the Data Protection Act, which unfortunately there isn't one. But I don't teach them that. I teach them how do you think about an issue. When I say data sovereignty, how do you think about that issue, right? What are the perspectives that are out there? That's what. So yes, you can say that yes, qualitatively maybe NLS kids, I mean, using NLS broadly, kids have a certain advantage in the sense that they are exposed to more literature from an earlier age. Their research capabilities may be slightly tinkered simply because of the amount of assignments, etc., that they have to do over time. Their way of using the library, their way of interacting with people, and general confidence is higher. All of that is true. All of that is true. But is that a bridge, or is that an insurmountable barrier? I don't think so. At least in litigation, it most certainly is not. In fact, the arrogance that people inherit from the NLU system can be a huge, huge barrier to them succeeding in litigation. And I have continuously repeated this in my classes, and I try to tell people that, you know, but then again, it's not something that, what can I say? People absorb through osmosis. I think people absorb the opposite through osmosis. That's the culture. And it's a very problematic culture. But if you're, just to come back to the point, if you're somebody from not from a national law school, I would really recommend that you think about why you're trying to drop the baggage and whether the baggage is actually a real disadvantage or not. It may, in fact, be an advantage, the way I see it, because if you can free up more time, if your academic commitments are less rigorous, I mean, it just may make more sense for you to spend that time doing something else which is constructive, which will help in your career in the long run.
Sure.
Right? Yeah.
Just on that, I mean, could start this podcast because academic commitments in my law school weren't that rigorous. So, you know, and then I'm able to have wonderful conversations.
See, I could never do something like this. I remember when I joined NUJS, it was 2008, 1st of July, my first class. And on the 18th of July was our first submission. And obviously none of us knew how to do research the academic way. So, and nowadays it's become a lot simpler because of various processes. But back then you had to, I think I wrote 30,000 words, all of us, our entire batch.
In your first
words.
semester?
Yes, 30,000 words of submissions for 5 subjects in the first semester, apart from examinations. And we had 2 sets of vivas, one subject, one project viva. So yeah, I mean, this sounds rigorous. It just helps you develop the an ethic of working hard. But are you trying to tell me that you need to come to whatever, Harvard, Yale, Columbia, whatever, in order to learn a work ethic? So I think you can't get through if you don't have a work ethic. Yeah, because just the application process is so daunting. I don't think anybody is sitting at home doing this application, right? Everybody's working or in college. They're not sitting at home taking a year off just to apply. Very few people I know do that. So you're juggling things already. You have some kind of a work ethic. So are you telling me that you need to come here just to learn how to work hard? I don't know if that makes sense.
That's a really, you know, interesting perspective. And I was listening to you very intently, and I'm curious to see what the viewers make of this part of the conversation. But, you know, moving forward, and I'll tie what I have to say with the question so that we don't detour a lot. But one perspective from my experience with regard to this quote unquote NLU v non-NLU debate is that more than anything, more than the learning, more than the teaching methodology, people in certain law schools get access to a community of really hardworking, committed, and eventually successful people. Like you said, you know, in a process like application, The support of your friends helped you a lot. And I know many law schools where it's going to be extremely difficult to even find someone who's gone to Ivy League. So in that sense, I think it could be a little bit challenging. And just connecting it to a question, Agnida, if someone's coming from a background like this in a
Yeah.
city and in a college where they don't really know anyone who's been to Oxbridge or been to Ivy League, the first instinct that sets in is that I'm just not good enough for Harvard. So, how do you overcome that feeling, if at all there is that feeling, and how do you go to applying to such an institution without any support, so to speak?
That's a great question. The presumption behind saying that you need to get a support system is that you can have one.
Yeah.
And that presumption comes from a position of privilege. You've realized that that's my favorite word. but it's only because at every juncture of this process, I realize how much of it I have. Of course, consciousness is the starting point of it, but you're absolutely right. There are a lot of people who don't have access to these resources. For them, what can be the strategy, right? I think one thing that you can definitely do is to reach out to people who may have gone there, which is easy enough to find. I mean, all the universities on their websites will tell you the students who are doing X, Y, or Z. Most, especially from Indian law schools, a large number of people come to any and every university that is, right? So I don't think access to people is the problem. The problem is the access to known people.
Yeah.
So you may not know me personally, but if you were to reach out to me, I would, if I could spare the time, definitely help you out. If I couldn't, then I would probably direct you to someone who could, right? And by that, I am not volunteering help. Please, let's just get that. Because in any case, I end up writing so many recommendations. One of my professors actually told me that you should stop writing that many recommendations because it kind of dilutes the value of the recommendations you have, etc. So just to come back to the point, I think there's enough and more opportunity for you to be able to reach out to people, especially with LinkedIn and all these things nowadays. It becomes that much easier. So I think there is value to doing some more research. I keep telling you that the difference between people with access and without it is that the people without access need to go the extra mile.
Yeah.
Is that fair? Absolutely not. But is that the reality? It is.
Yeah.
So you have to make use of whatever resources are there at your disposal, and on LinkedIn everybody kind of adds everyone else, so I don't think that's a big problem. Again, not an invitation to add me. So but there are any number of people who will be willing to help if you ask for it, right? So that sounds a little Dumbledore-ish maybe, but you have to kind of believe that there is a system out there, even if that system is not known to you, even if that system is not personal to you. I really think that it's important for you to first identify that system, collect enough information. It may delay the process for you for 6 months, which others will not suffer, but you cannot keep comparing yourself to others. Everybody's running their own race, and that's so true for everything and anything you do in life. Let me give you an example. I mean, it just sounds like a lot of preaching coming from somebody who's barely made it himself. But the question is, I'm 32 years old. That's above the Indian cutoff for doing a master's degree, mostly, and most definitely a master's degree in law, because most people I'm with in class are nowhere near my age, right?
Yeah.
At least from India. It's different for different countries. Of course, a lot of people come here to do their masters at an age which is much more advanced age. But I'm 32. I'm definitely, so in order to beat the system that exists of whatever you call meritocracy, I had to do a lot more. My grades weren't the best in law school in my undergraduate degree, and because that kind of counts and that kind of influences a lot of things you have to do. For me, the route here was a very circuitous one. I had to tick many more boxes in order to be able to be eligible to apply. I had to do a lot many more things in order to build a CV and have a running chance at have a decent chance at the application. So everybody's running their own races. I'm not trying to say that things were more difficult for me. The things were more difficult for me because I didn't study. So it's just as simple as that. So if if the reason for you doing, let me rephrase that. If you feel that you don't have access to resources, to people, to whatever knowledge you need to take 6 months extra, but do not compare yourself to another person who does not need to do that. If I sat here and compared myself to XYZ people who have, come here on full scholarship vis-a-vis those who have come here without any scholarship, and I feel good or sad about myself, then it's just a waste of my time and my energy and my mental peace. It just makes no sense. Somebody sitting here and thinking that, okay, I could have done this at the age of 26 and it would have been so much better. I would have been so much further in my career. Friends of mine have completed their PhDs, right? And I haven't even begun that process. I haven't even probably begun thinking about that process, etc. Right? So everyone's running a different race. So keep that in mind when you apply. Don't compare your situation to another person's. Everybody's got their own pains and their own privileges. And maybe we've got certain privileges we don't even recognize.
For sure. For sure. Definitely. This is so insightful. It's as if, I could just sit here and keep listening to you, because all of these conversations are so important to have. And I hope that, viewers derive value from it. I'm going to surely extract parts of it and upload them independently so that certain parts of the conversation are more accessible to people. But just moving forward, and you mentioned that your grades were not that high. And I think that's something a lot of people would be curious to know, because the ideal image we have of a Harvard LL.M is that, there'll be superstars excelling at everything, must have, I don't know, played for India, some sport, top tier academics, published in Harvard Law Review and whatnot. But like you said, your grades weren't that high. And I was listening to another one of your interviews that's how you didn't apply to Oxbridge, because those are some institutions that prefer students with much higher grades. So talk to us a little bit about this image of an ideal candidate who can make it to Ivy League, and what things that are generally thought to be important aren't that important, or there are ways to get around them.
Yeah. That's another question that I keep getting asked. So I think it's a good point to talk about this. So when I say that I had poor grades, I mean that in my undergraduate, after getting through in my undergraduate, my grades weren't the best, which was something. So when I finally joined the faculty years later, some of my colleagues were astonished, and they had every reason to be, because they taught. So
Okay.
yeah, but I mean, like I mentioned, for my teaching, I'd say that was a positive, because I understood the perspective of the disinterested student, and I always pitch, even now, to the person who is least interested in my class. I never pitch to the person who's going to get, I don't know, they're going to go to Oxford anyway, right? Because a person who's going to go to Oxford is going to go to Oxford irrespective of me, sometimes despite me, right? But my objective is to approach or appeal to that individual who is like me, completely disinterested in class. I also realized that the reason I was sort of disinterested in class was because I came from a very different background. I studied science and I wanted to continue to study science, but I became a lawyer by accident. So, which is true for many people during the time, actually. A number of my friends, we had very little information and we just went in for the exam. Anyhow, the point being that, yes, your grades matter. So if you're thinking about applying to these institutions, be absolutely certain that your grades are going to count. If you want your grade not to count, then you have to overcompensate, which has been the story of my life ever since. So the easy part, and I'm saying this with complete acknowledgement of the fact that it is not easy at the time. But in hindsight, I realized that it would have been far easier for me if I had just paid attention during my UG and, just been serious about my studies. My path to here or wherever else would have been so much more comfortable. It would have been a more comfortable journey. But because it wasn't, and because I continued to hold the ambition of doing a foreign PhD, a foreign LL.M, therefore I just I had to overcompensate in every way. And how did I do that? I first figured out what my area is going to be. Once I figured out what my area is going to be, I published in that area. I tried to make sure that I built a profile which at least roughly looks balanced from every angle, or in whatever angles I could think of. And then that's what and then I played up to my strengths and applied to places which either had a technology program or had enough faculty on their roster who would be able to offer something roughly equivalent to a technology program. And that's how I applied. I consciously stayed away from Oxford and Cambridge, knowing fully well that most probably I wouldn't have made it. And in any case, they did not have a dedicated tech program.
Yeah.
And I was also at the stage in my career where I wasn't going to go and study for a general LL.M, because again, the brand didn't matter. I already had my job. I'm going to go back to my job. So I really don't, I wasn't bothered about that kind of thing. So I only applied to those places where I had a strategic interest in. So for instance, if I am applying to Melbourne, I'm not doing it for tech, I'm doing it for regulation. If I'm applying to NUS, I'm doing it for tech. If I'm applying to Columbia, then I'm doing for interdisciplinary stuff. If I'm applying to Harvard, it's because there are enough people on the faculty who teach tech, etc. So that's how I figured out the way. And I did not build a profile for a university. I just built a profile. So I realized that if I'm going to go into academia, what are the things that people are going to look at? One is publications, one is conference, the other is XYZ. And that's how I built it. If I want to, stand out in a crowd, then I should have XYZ factors. That's the first thing I identified. And then I tried to do things accordingly. It sounds all very well planned in hindsight. It was not that well planned. A large part of it was done automatically. So for instance, for getting the job, I needed to do the same things anyway. I needed to publish, I needed to attend conferences, I needed to, let's say, have a general profile of a certain kind. I did that. And all those things added. So whatever work you're doing, make sure you do it well and make sure you're building towards something. So if you have the idea of an LLM in mind, then make sure you're building a profile, which is something that you can portray a certain way. Because it's at some level, it's about selling the idea of you. Right, selling the idea of you, that who are you and what do you bring to the table. So if you're thinking about an LLM, it's very important to try and think about strategically about building that profile. That's what I did. A lot of people, for them it happens naturally. They're just good at stuff and they work hard and they're serious and stuff, and then it just falls into place one after the other. That was not the case with me. So I had overcompensated for a very long time to finally in my middle ages manage to get an LLM admit. So,
right.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a really comprehensive answer, Agnidipto. Thank you so much. And I'd like to come to the final segment of the conversation today. So in the final segment, Agnidipto, I'd like to speak to you about a paper that you had published in the Oxford Human Rights Journal on the constitutionality of the marital rape exception with Ms. Adrija Ghosh. For the benefit of our viewers, as most of you already know, the constitutionality of the provision is under challenge at the Delhi High Court, and hearing is ongoing in the matter. Before we proceed into this conversation, I would strongly urge everyone to go read that paper and then listen to this conversation. The purpose of this conversation is to encourage everyone to read that paper and derive value from it, because it's truly extraordinary. When I read that paper, that's how I became aware of Agnidipto, and I contacted him, and he was very kind to come and speak with us. With that, Agnidipto, let's get into it. So from a complete layperson's perspective, the first criticism that's mounted to the marital rape exception is that it can be misused. And your paper has presented a response to it. So can you share as to why that argument is invalid?
Since you have linked the paper, and since this is the only way in which people can get their scholarships read nowadays, I will encourage everyone to read the paper to find out the argument that is being made. But in brief, what misuse is generally a bad idea to start from. It's a bad starting point. Because what misuse, any conversation about misuse does is that it obfuscates the real reason why something is being talked about in the first place. The moment you say that a certain law can be misused, the immediate question that should come to your mind is, why was the law introduced in the first place? Something needs to exist. Something needs to have a use for it to have a misuse. So let's take an example. In India, there's a lot of conversation about the misapplication or the misuse of 498A, right? I don't have to explain that. Everybody knows what 498A is. So there's a lot of conversation. In fact, the courts have made several statements, some of which is binding, a lot of which is not binding. We don't know the status of a lot of litigation that's going on in this regard. The only question that one raises is that whenever we make such a statement, two things. One, where is the empirical evidence? When you say that something is going to be misused or something is, you're saying that reflexively. And that's not necessarily untrue. You may have a strong hunch about something. But when you have a strong hunch about something, you've got to necessarily be able to back it up with some proof, some evidence, some shred of idea. Now, the other day I was reading this article, I think it came out on one of the legal websites, I'm not sure, where somebody who's been defending men who've been wrongly convicted or not convicted, but charged with 498A, etc. kind of cases, and where she's talking about the experiences that she's had defending these men, and said that, that the misuse had already begun, something of that sort. That was, I think, the title. Very interesting argument, but and of course, I mean, she's had such a long time in the business that she knows what's happening. But without taking anything away from it, it seems to suggest that it is the litigant who is coming up with the idea of misusing the law. Do you really feel, as a student of law, that in India, the average litigant has the legal know-how to misuse the law? We don't even know three provisions. The average Indian person, even if educated, does not know three provisions of the Constitution. How do you expect people to know how to misuse it? So where is the problem exactly? The problem of misuse comes from the fact that there are unscrupulous practitioners of law who are using this as an excuse to either forward their client's case or using this as a linchpin to as a tool to, let's say, either block a divorce proceeding or to hasten a divorce proceeding. It could go both ways depending on who it is. The idea ultimately is that misuse is happening at the behest of whom? And second is, if misuse is the concern, then why not have a remedy for falsity in court, which we already do in our criminal laws? We really don't need. So if the problem is that people are providing or are creating a fake account of things, then that's already something that the criminal law takes care of. Why not use that? Why not use it against frivolous litigation? The Supreme Court has come out very strongly against frivolous PILs being filed. So why not come out against false cases in the same light? There are so many other remedies available. To simply say that the entire issue should be sidestepped because the possibility of misuse exists. The possibility of misuse, I guess, would exist no matter what law you're talking about. Can you tell me, give me an example of one law which has never been misused? The entire point of having lawyers arguing both sides of the point is because there's only one that is legal, right? There is only one that is legitimate per the judicial decision. So that necessarily means the other is not. So can you argue that the lawyer arguing the opposite point is misusing the law? It's just a question of perspective. And with regard to the other argument that people raise in connection, it's the difficulty in collection of evidence. Right? That it's difficult to collect evidence between a husband and a wife. Very interesting argument, because if you look at the statutory law, and a lot of people seem to gloss over this fact, marital rape is already a civil offense in India. As Ms. Menka Gandhi, I think, in Parliament has made this statement. It's something that we had referenced in the piece as well. I think she made the statement in Parliament where she said that if there's no need to bring in criminal penalty, simply because the civil offense already exists and there are no cases filed under it. I'm not getting into the, let's say, the prudence of making a statement like that. And of course, there are political necessities that all of us must, even those of us who claim to champion such causes, have to keep in mind while making statements. The fact remains that it is not as if there is no. So there is a Dowry Prohibition Act, as we all know, right? There is a 498A. There is domestic violence recognized as a crime. So if other forms of violence, which also requires a certain amount of evidentiary there is the question of evidence even when it comes to intimate violence within partners. So it's not like intimate violence between partners is not recognized as a criminal offense. Why that then this one aspect will have to be treated separately? There is no justification for it, right? And the other aspect is, it is something that's been recognized as a crime across the world. The same issue of misuse would have applied to all those jurisdictions which have already recognized marital rape. Some of those jurisdictions belong to far more conservative societies than ours, right? Despite that, the recognition for marital rape as a crime exists in those jurisdictions. So how are they doing it? If it was so difficult, if it was so impossible, then if there is a problem, and you accept that there is a problem, then the problem is with your policing. The problem is not with non-recognition or recognition. So let's talk about what the problem is. The problem is the law, the way the law is being used. So who is responsible? The lawyer is responsible. The other part of the problem is with the gathering of evidence. And who is responsible? The police is responsible. So in both cases, it is the state or an individual lawyer or a set of lawyers who are implicated. Why are we denying the woman her rights upon facing violence based on the actions of other third parties?
Right. In fact, there was another very interesting point that I could recollect from your paper. It was that any discussion on the potential misuse of this ignores the social costs of the wife's right, which is, I think, another very interesting point. Do you want to develop a bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's quite self-explanatory. So it's very simple. Till you recognize something as a legal wrong, all those who are suffering that legal wrong technically have not suffered any wrong in the eyes of the law. So if you take, let's say, 5 years to recognize something which I think everybody in the right mind should agree to recognize as a problem, if you take 5 years, the cost is in lives. And that cost is, you've gone beyond the point of return. Because you're talking about intimate partner violence. We've gone beyond the point of return. And that is precisely the point I was trying to make. But I'm saying that any argument about misuse is going to simply add layers and layers and layers to a conversation, because misuse does not talk about the issue, as I mentioned in my earlier answer. Misuse doesn't talk about the issue. Misuse says, okay, your issue may be whatever it is, but because X exists, we cannot talk about that issue.
Right.
And that's why I think it simply, derails the entire conversation. And that does not do justice to all those people whose lives are going to be at stake because of your delay, because of your indecision, and because of your hesitancy.
Right. The second part of the paper that I wish to touch upon, and this is because this is one argument that one hears most frequently in court and in op-eds outside, that, well, as bad as it may be, we need this law to protect, quote unquote, the institution of marriage. What do you feel about that?
So there's a very elaborate response to this that we have provided.
Sure. Right.
The paper is kind of structured. In the first part of the paper, we've talked about the logical responses, or in fact tried to find the logical fallacies in the arguments raised, such as preserving the institution of marriage. And in the second part, we talked about the constitutional aspect of it. So there is a long and elaborate bit of which I can maybe mention in the course of this. But whenever you talk about the institution, again, let's look at this in a logical way, right? When you talk about preserving an institution, who does the institution serve? What is the purpose of the institution? That is the first question. If the purpose of the institution, if we go back in history, what was the purpose of the institution of marriage? It was to legitimize sexual relations between man and woman for the purpose of procreation, right? Now, if we take that as a working, of course, that's not definition, but if we take that as a working model for where we see every aspect of that understanding has changed, right? If it is to legitimize sexual relations between man and woman. First, what about homosexual people? Their right to marry has not found, that has not been judicially established yet. But because 377 has been the 377 has been read down in part, it effectively means that they should be able to have, they should be able to expect a possible right to marry sometime in the future. Second, Some may even argue that exists today in the absence of a law to the contrary.
Sure.
So I'm not getting into that legal debate. Second, so the man and woman question has shifted. Second, do we really need to legitimize sexual relations between man and woman anymore? That's not where society is at. It used to be where society was at. It's not where society is at today. Premarital sex in India may not be, may continue to be somewhat of a taboo depending on which city, which place, which village, where your socio-economic surroundings. The fact of the matter is that premarital sex in India under the law is accepted, so long it is consensual and all those other factors are met. So the whole question has shifted. Third is the question of procreation. If that is the ultimate, and that was in the classical understanding, the ultimate purpose of marriage is procreate, and some people might decide not to do that, and a lot of people are deciding for a variety of factors to not do that.
Yeah.
So does that make their marriage less valid? Right? So all of the entire concept of what it means to preserve an institution, what is the purpose the institution serves? If that itself has undergone a tremendous change, where the Supreme Court itself has said that, I think I keep forgetting the judgment, but a long-standing live-in relationship is given the status of a married couple, right? They equated the status of a married couple and the status of a long-term a couple in a long-term live-in relationship are equated by the Supreme Court under certain circumstances, of course. But the fact that there is recognition, there is judicial recognition for that, shows that the understanding of social mores have evolved, and the understanding of marriage as a concept has evolved. That's one. Second is, the moment you talk about this one aspect, you're talking about domestic violence being a criminal. You're talking about dowry, deaths, and all of these things. Laws on these issues exist for decades. So clearly, you are not. Your concept of marriage is not this pure and sacrosanct union which cannot be encroached upon by state. State is coming into your bedroom if you are beating up your partner, right? So that means the state can, under certain circumstances, come in, but not on other circumstances. What is the basis of this distinction? The basis of this distinction is the man's right to claim sex after marriage is over. Once the act of marriage is done, right? This man's right to claim sex, which does not exist prior to marriage, creates a hierarchy. And this hierarchy is false. That's at least my argument. That's our argument.
Yeah.
Right? That it creates a hierarchy of saying, okay, some sex is legitimate, some sex is illegitimate. That some sex is accepted, some sex is not accepted. Why? If there are two consenting adults, on what grounds are you making this distinction? On what basis are you making this hierarchy? And second, the presumption that consent is given immediately upon signing a piece of paper effectively means you are saying that in the marital relationship, sexual relations are central. On what basis are you coming to this determination? What if there is it's a marriage of which is more like a partnership, which is more like an emotional partnership? It could be a marriage of any kind. That's why I began by saying that our understanding of marriage has evolved. Our understanding of marriage has evolved from a hierarchical structure to an increasingly, I wouldn't say equal, but somewhat more of a partnership kind of understanding. And this is natural because that's happened in all societies and it's happening in our society currently. But the idea that the central element of marriage is sexual relations is, I think, very iffy, very iffy. Second, something that ties into the misuse point as well, in fact, is the fact that we keep saying that our understanding, the Indian idea of marriage is a certain way and therefore it needs to be preserved. Now that's odd because there is, what's the Indian, okay, forget about the Indian idea of marriage. Let's talk about something else. How do you define Indian culture? What is Indian culture? We keep talking about Indian culture, right? What's Indian culture? Let's take a very obvious, very Facebook meme level example of this so that everybody can relate. I am a Bengali. While I'm not practicing any religion as such, I was born Hindu. I consume, and everybody at home practices Hinduism. The practice of my Hinduism is very different from a number of my friends who are from different other parts of the country. I have friends from various, say, some of the South Indian states whose practice on the exact same day, on the exact same festival is completely the opposite. So the best example is that of, let's say, what is we call Paila Boishak, which is the first day of the new year, right?
Okay.
Same thing that is celebrated in parts of South India is the beginning of the year, harvest season, etc., etc. And the entire, not only are the rituals different, every aspect of the celebration is different. During Durga Puja, Bengalis consume meat. A lot of people don't. So what's the culture? So even if you forget about Indian culture, even if you talk about Hinduism, what is the Hindu culture? Can you put a particular definition to it? You cannot. The heterogeneity is what the culture is. So how are you saying that there is a certain culture of marriage? Astonishingly, look at Nepal.
Yeah.
Nepal is a Hindu country. I mean, it's a majority Hindu country, and they have criminalized marital rape. So how is this happening? You keep criticizing, say countries across the world by saying, okay, we are better off than X and we are better off than Y, by saying that they're more conservative. But in those conservative societies, they have banned marital rape. So how are you saying that it's different? I don't see any logic in this argument. And in fact, on the consent question, I think the court made a comment the other day about how there's too much focus on consent. I've heard the debate. There's a debate regarding that statement. Some people are saying that the judge's comment is taken out of context. I don't know. I won't get into that. But the fact is that the Supreme Court itself has made an exception for this, right? So there is a judgment in which the Supreme Court says that minors cannot consent. Therefore, marital rape is an exemption, but not applicable below the age of 18.
Yeah.
Right? So if that is the case already, then that means consent is material. The court, through its own judgment, is admitting that consent is material. So too much talk or too less talk, unimportant. If consent is there, it is okay. If it is not there, then it is marital rape. It's as simple as that.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on this, Agnida. And once again, to our viewers, there is a lot more going in the paper with regards to Article 14, 15, 19, 21, tracing the entire genesis of how it
and
came.
23.
Right. And 23. So a comprehensive understanding and analysis of the issue written in a language that makes you feel as if you're reading, something as accessible as a newspaper editorial. So whether you're from a law background or from a non-legal background, the link to that article is in the description section. Please be sure to check it out. Thank you.
Yeah.
And with that, Agnida, I think we can come to an end of today's conversation. Yeah. Thank you so incredibly much for taking time out of your really busy schedule and speaking for so long with me. I think this is the longest episode of Letter of Flow that I've recorded, but also, in my view, one of the most insightful episode. We were able to talk about so many different things, and I really can't thank you enough for your time, Agnida. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Sarthak. I've enjoyed our conversation as well. It's not often that you get to touch upon so many subjects in a single conversation. I just hope that with whatever we've discussed, some people can take a leaf out of something or the other and maybe you utilize it. As I began by saying, it's the collection of information and what to do next is often one of the biggest challenges that people face. So I'm glad if I could be of any use. And
right.
It was great talking to you. You're very easy to talk to. I'm sure you've heard that before. You're very easy to talk to, and this was a very enjoyable conversation. So thank you again for having me over.